It was revealed during the trial that Richard Childress was reportedly seeking to sell a stake of Richard Childress Racing, and Johnny Morris writes a scathing letter to NASCAR and calls out NASCAR defends Richard Childress. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and our motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint schemes we're taking a look at is Carson Quaffle, Connor Zilisch, Justin Allgaier, and Ross Chastain's 2026 Regisec scheme that we'll see throughout the 2026 year. I really like it. Look at these cars. Look very similar to one that Connor Zilisch had in 2025. It looks really solid. Looking forward to on the racetrack in 26. The next paint schemes we're taking a look at is Ryan Preece's, Brad Keselowski's, and Chris Buescher's 2026 bodyguard schemes that we'll see throughout the 2026 year. All look very similar. They don't really have a different identity, but I think they all do look really good. It's a shame the normal Fastball car will not be on track in 2026, but I do think this looks good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this upcoming year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Alex Bowman's 2026 Ally scheme that we'll see in most races in 2026. This scheme looks absolutely phenomenal. It's not my favorite Ally scheme. I still think the 2021 one is probably my favorite one up to this point, but this one looks awesome. It looks really, really good, and I think Ally knocked this one out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is William Byers' 2026 HP scheme that we'll see in 2 Cup races in 2026. This, for me, is probably the worst paint scheme we've seen so far this year. It looks like a test car, to be honest, which a test car is not that bad if you're going to use it for testing, but it looks like a test car to me. There's not much really going on with this one. It doesn't look great. I think it's a bad-looking car. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Berry's 2026 Aero scheme that we'll see in select races in 2026. Looks very similar to one they had in 2025, but I do think it actually looks really good. I was a big fan of the 2025 one, and I think the 26 one looks good. The colors on it pop pretty well. Looking forward to on the racetrack in the 2026 year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Wilde Chips. As it was announced early this morning that Wilde Chips will sponsor Carson Quaffle for 3 NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series races in 2026. I believe this will be the first time that Wilde Chips has sponsored a car in NASCAR's top 3 divisions, so I think they've had association with NASCAR before, but I'm not entirely sure. But this is a big deal for Carson Quaffle. Obviously, there's some questions on how many races Quaffle is going to run in 2026 in that number 1 car. He's going to run a lot of races. Obviously, he and Connor Zilisch are going to split that 1 car throughout the year. We don't know what the paint scheme also is going to look like for 2026. I got to say, though, this is an exciting deal to see. And pretty cool nonetheless to see that Wilde Chips is coming on to sponsor Carson Quaffle and select O'Reilly Auto Parts races and welcome them to the sport. It's exciting to see a new sponsor in the sport for 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Sunoco. As it was announced earlier today that Sunoco has become the official fuel supplier of the Cars Tour effective immediately. This is a really big deal for the Cars Tour, but this also could be a really big deal for NASCAR because obviously there's been a lot of rumors that Sunoco, it's unknown if they're going to return to be the official fuel supplier. I don't remember if they signed an extension or not because this was a contract year for Sunoco to be working with NASCAR. They've been with NASCAR as the exclusive fuel supplier since 2004. So that's a big question mark at this point is whether or not they're going to continue being the fuel supplier of NASCAR going forward. But it's a big deal for Sunoco, a really huge deal. They'll be working with the Cars Tour. The Cars Tour is continuing to grow and be a big series at this point. For the late model side of things, it's a huge sponsorship pull, a really huge deal for that series. Really awesome and really great to see that Sunoco is going to be working with the Cars Tour going forward into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Air Force Thunderbirds. As it was announced yesterday that the Air Force Thunderbirds will be returning for another year in 2026 and will be being the flyover for the 2026 Daytona 500. The Air Force Thunderbirds have been the flyover for the Daytona 500 since the mid-2010s. I think it's like the 13th or 14th year straight. They have been the flyover for the Daytona 500, and they're once again going to be back for the 2026 year. This is one of the big traditions that NASCAR has had for a very, very long time, and I think the Air Force Thunderbirds are a really big touch after they get done with the national anthem every single time. it's always something that I really love and I really, really enjoy. And I think that's a big touch that Daytona 500 has. It's a huge and really, really massive deal to see that this event will be continuing, and also pretty cool that the Air Force Thunderbirds, the flyover like that, is going to be continuing in 2026. I love that seeing them fly over every year. It's a huge deal nonetheless, and I think it's really awesome and pretty great to see that the Air Force Thunderbirds will be continuing that tradition in 2026. Really exciting and really great to see, and exciting that they'll be returning in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeremy Mayfield. As it was announced last night that Jeremy Mayfield is officially launching a new podcast with 5 Wide Sports for 2026. It's going to be The Jeremy Mayfield Show. Now, the exact date for The Jeremy Mayfield Show was not officially announced and confirmed, but like I mentioned, I think 5 Wide Sports, like I mentioned, is expected to be working with Jeremy Mayfield on this show, and there's probably going to be a lot of secrets that are going to be revealed from behind the scenes in NASCAR. There's probably going to be a lot of things that have happened in the last 10 to 15 years. Obviously, we know what happened at the end of 2009, where Jeremy Mayfield lost his opportunity and chance to race in the sport because of some unfortunate things that happened in the industry, and there's a lot of people that think Jeremy should come back to the sport. Obviously, he was reinstated by NASCAR many, many years ago, but he hasn't come back to the sport, and judging by the way he's reacted to a lot of things that have been happening as of late, I'm not sure if Jeremy Mayfield is ever going to come back to the sport unless there's some leadership and executive changes that do happen, because I think he's got a lot of dirty laundry on the sport, and I'm very interested to see what he has to tell about the sport going forward. So I'm very interested to see how this show is going to go. I'm definitely going to be tuning into this podcast for sure, because a podcast like this can be really exciting and definitely really fun to listen to. He'll probably have a lot of guests on the show. I'd love to see Mark Martin get on this show throughout the 2026, so we'll see if that happens. I think it's an exciting deal and pretty great that Jeremy Mayfield will be forming a new show for 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're unfortunately taking this episode to a sour note. As this sadly was announced, I believe, over the weekend and over the course of the last couple of days, that Rick Hodges has sadly passed away. Rick Hodges, for those who don't know, has been a veteran of this industry for many, many years. He had worked with a lot of drivers and many industry personnel. He had worked with Legacy Motor Club and Jimmy Johnson. I think he had been a truck driver helping get their cars to the track. He also, I believe, had worked with Kevin Harvick for many, many years as well, and worked with Ronnie Childress over the years as well. And many in the industry respected what Rick Hodges did and how much love he had for the sport and had for the racing community as well. My thoughts and prayers do go out to the Hodges family during this really unfortunate time. We're thinking about the Hodges family currently at the moment, and we'll think about the Hodges family, as we all know, a sad day for the sport and a sad day for the community. My thoughts go out to the Hodges family during this tragic time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Lionel Top 10 for 2025. As it was reported by Adam Stern and Lionel as well, that they have revealed their top 10 paint schemes for the 2025 NASCAR season. And as you know, there was a lot of very interesting names, but a lot of things that are associated with one team, one driver, and one organization. And number one for the top paint schemes sold in 2025, according to Lyle, it was Justin Allgaier's Travers whiskey car that ran for the 2025 Daytona 500. And number two was Dale Jr.'s Budweiser late model car that he ran at the Thanksgiving Fall Classic, and I think he ran eventually also in 2025. Another scheme that was inside the top 10 was a Red Bull paint scheme. I think there was a Josh Berry paint scheme in there. I think some Kyle Larson schemes were on the list. I think even Chase Elliott made the list as well. But seeing that Dale Jr. is sold number 2 is kind of shows where NASCAR really needs to kind of work on, is getting some of these younger drivers to be a little bit more popular. But it's also not surprising that things also associated with Dale Jr. I mean, 2 of the top 3 are Travers whiskey cars that ran the Daytona 500, and it was the only time in 2025 that car even showed up. There were rumors, granted, they were going to run that car in multiple races this year, but obviously, of course, they only ran that car in one race. It's interesting for sure. I wonder if maybe we'll see some different stuff inside the top 10 next year, like maybe Condor Zilich's cars and SVG's cars will get closer to the top. Who knows at this point, nonetheless, but certainly interesting, the top 10 that was revealed from Lionel. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tyler Tomassi. is it was announced yesterday that Tyler Tomassi will drive the number 69 for MBM Motorsports in the Craftsman Truck Series opener at Daytona International Speedway in February. Tyler Tomassi did make a few NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series starts at MBM Motorsports in 2025. He also did make a few O'Reilly Auto Parts Series starts in 2025 for MBM Motorsports, and has had made select starts at other organizations. Drove for Rain Brothers throughout 2025, and I think he drove for some other organizations in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series throughout the year as well. Tyler Tomassi did an alright job despite the equipment. He did fail to qualify, I believe, for a few races throughout the 2025 year, but he did show decent speed when he was in an MBM Motorsports truck, because we all know those trucks weren't that great. Obviously, Casey Mears was the best driver behind the wheel of the number 69 truck that ran, but obviously Casey Mears has a lot more experience, and I think he's a more talented guy than Tyler Tomassi. But Tyler Tomassi does have the experience now, and because he did run a lot of races, he is qualified and has the credentials out to run at Daytona. Otherwise, he would have to run the ARCA race on the day before, on the Saturday before he got the opportunity to run the truck race. So it's and do the ARCA test as well. So it's interesting for sure. This is going to be a really strong opportunity for Tyler going into 2026, as I don't know what the remainder of his schedule is going to look like for the 2026 NASCAR year. But this is still a really exciting opportunity, and hopefully Tyler can show some good stuff. Again, a really good opportunity. We'll see if he can perform at Daytona and some other races throughout the 2026 year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Helmut Marko. As it was officially confirmed on Monday and Tuesday that Helmut Marko is officially leaving Red Bull effective immediately, and will be leaving Red Bull at the conclusion of 2025 and will not be returning in 2026. It seems like Helmut Marko is retiring from Red Bull and retired from being the head of Red Bull in Formula One as well. Helmut Marko has been at Red Bull for a very, very long time. He's been there, I think, pretty much since the get-go back in 2005 and 2006 when the organization was formed, and has been involved in the Formula One family for a very, very long time. To see Helmut Marko officially leaving after rumors and speculation, I think it was something that really needed to happen. There's been a lot of talk over the years that Helmut Marko is kind of like a toxic individual, and has kind of been a big reason why a lot of bad decisions have been made at Red Bull over the years. But he's also made good moves over the years. He was a big reason why Jenson Button got a chance and opportunity to be part of the Red Bull family, had a ton of success. He also discovered Max Verstappen, where Max Verstappen had a ton of success as well, and is considered one of the greatest Formula One drivers now, and has a really good shot going into next year to win his 5th world championship in the last 6 years. And then, of course, he's also gotten Daniel Ricciardo up there, and now Isaac Hadjar is also getting a chance and opportunity to be in Formula One in 2026 at the Red Bull organization, though, of course, he's been with the Visa Cash App team over the last year or so. So we'll see how things go there, but it's a sad day for Red Bull. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are going to be happy to see him gone. A big move for sure, and pretty wild to see that he's officially out of the team. Again, there's been rumors and speculation around this, but it's officially confirmed that he will not be back with Red Bull going forward. That's big, because over this year, 3 of the big names, Adrian Newey, Christian Horner, and Helmut Marko, who were big in helping Red Bull have a ton of success in the early to mid 2020s, are no longer existing and are gone altogether. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Spire Motorsports. As it was announced earlier this evening that Spire Motorsports has officially announced a new development program that they're going to be calling the New Ascent program. 3 drivers are going to be part of this program: Gio Scalesi, Carson Hocevar, and Tristan McKee. Beginning with Gio Scalesi has been driving, I believe, for Tyler Courtney, a.k.a. Sunshine's group. There's been a lot of rumors over the years that Tyler Courtney has been working with the Spire Motorsports group in the High Limit Series as well. And Gio Scalesi, I think, is associated with that organization as well. So it sounds like Gio Scalesi, according to this, is going to be racing a lot of different forms of racing going forward in the future. And then you have Carson Hocevar and Tristan McKee. Carson Hocevar, who of course currently drives the number 77 car for Spire Motorsports and won't be leaving a 77 anytime soon. Carson, very talented race car driver, of course won 4 Craftsman Truck Series races in 2023, also did pick up a win with Spire in the Truck Series in 2025, and did come close to picking up a few wins in the Cup Series this year with the speed that 77 car showed. He did a really good job with the program this year, but also did have a ton of DNS. He's going to get the opportunity to run a lot of different forms of racing. I would also expect that Carson Hocevar is probably going to do some dirt late model racing like he did at the Gateway Dirt Nationals earlier this year. And finally, of course, Tristan McKee. Tristan McKee won some races in the Trans Am Series. He is also the youngest winner in ARCA Menards Series history at just the young age of 15 years old after winning at Watkins Glen. And he's also going to make some select starts in the ARCA Menards Series in 2026. And also, from what I understand, will be making some starts in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series once he does turn 16 years old in July or August. I think all three have a lot of potential. We saw some good stuff from Tristan in some of the events that took place down there at Five Flags in Pensacola. We'll see how things go, but I think it's a big move for Spire to announce a development program. I think there's potential for a lot of success for this Ascent program going forward into the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin J. Hill. As it was announced earlier today that Austin J. Hill has officially confirmed he is going to run select NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series races in 2026. Now the team he's running for was not officially disclosed today, but he is going to run all the road course races in 2026, which I believe there will be 5 or 6 of those next year. He's going to open up by racing his Circuit Americas, then he is going to run at Watkins Glen. Then he's going to run at San Diego on the Naval Base. Then he is going to run at Sonoma and finally run at the Charlotte Roval. Austin J. Hill, again, we don't know what team exactly he's running for. My theory currently at the moment is that more than likely he is going to end up driving for an organization, let's say like Joey Gase Motorsports. Obviously, he drove for that team in 2025 and did all right with that organization considering the equipment he's in. And I think it's going to be kind of wild that 2 Austin Hills are going to be in the field. The CW is going to have to probably put Austin J. Hill to make sure to differentiate so no one gets confused that 2 Austin Hills are in the field. And again, we'll probably find out in the not-so-distant future what team exactly is going to run for. Again, I would think more than likely be Joey Gase Motorsports, but we'll be waiting on when that does officially get announced and confirmed. We'll probably find that out here in the not-so-distant future on what team he's going to drive for. Still a really big deal nonetheless, and good opportunity for him to race in the O'Reilly Series on road courses next year. Obviously, guys like Brent Cruz and Connor Zilisch, Shane Van Gisbergen, among others, are probably going to win the road course races, but it'll be fun to see the remainder of the schedule also and see what else he ends up racing in 2026 as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about ARCA East. As it was officially announced yesterday that ARCA East has officially announced their 2026 schedule. There will be 8 races in the ARCA East schedule in 2026. The schedule goes like this. The first race will take place at Hickory Motor Speedway on March 28th, the first time the ARCA East Series has raced there. Then they'll be racing at Rock Game Speedway on April the 4th. After that, they'll race in Nashville, the National Fairgrounds, on May the 2nd. Then they'll race at Toledo Speedway on May 16th. Then they'll take a couple months off and race at Indianapolis Raceway Park on July 24th. After that, we'll race at Flat Rock on August 1st. Then they'll race at Iowa Speedway on August 7th. And then they'll race at Bristol Motor Speedway on September 17th. It is worth noting, I believe, 4 of those races are going to be combination events. I think Rockingham, Toledo, IRP, and Bristol are all going to be combination races, and also I believe Iowa Speedway will be a combination race as well. So there's only going to be 3 races not associated with the main ARCA races, so a lot of those drivers that race in ARCA East are going to be running the main ARCA events if they've already declared for that at this point. The schedule is certainly interesting. I think the ARCA West schedule is actually a little bit more in-depth compared to the ARCA East schedule. I feel like it's kind of like the forgotten stepchild when it comes to the main ARCA series. I really would have liked to see more races on the ARCA East schedule, probably around 10 to 12 events, and I like a little more standalone when it comes to that. I think also racing at tracks like Stafford would be really cool, and Lion Rock would have certainly been interesting, though that would have been a conjunction race with the main ARCA series when the truck series also goes to Lion Rock as well. I think the schedule is certainly interesting. I think it certainly could be better, but I also think it certainly could be worse as well. There's some good things about the schedule. I like the Hickories on the schedule for next year, and again, I do think there's some interesting and solid things about the 2026 ARCA schedule. I like some things about it overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. As it was officially announced earlier today, that Garrett Smithley will be returning to SS Greenlight Racing in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2026, driving a number 0 car. This is going to be the first time that the single-digit 0 car has been in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in quite some time. Funny enough, Garrett Smithley actually was the driver, so it seems like the number 14 may not be returning in 2026 because we do know that Josh Berlicki will be driving a 07 car for this organization in the 2026 year as well. As for Garrett Smithley, It wasn't officially confirmed whether he'd be full-time with this organization in 2026 or if he's just going to be full-time this year. Personally, I think Garrett Smithley, as much as I think he's an okay driver, he didn't really set the world on fire in 2025. His performances really were not there throughout the year. I feel like there's a lot of times where the car was way off the pace and was kind of subpar throughout the season, and there was a lot of times where the CW focused on him, and I appreciate that they were focusing on people like Garrett Smithley, because I think you need to focus on some of these guys that aren't, which I think they did a really good job on that. But at the same token, same time, a lot of times throughout the year, I felt like the Zero car was just off the pace and wasn't up to par and didn't have a ton of speed. So I'm not sure if going into this year, if he's going to be really, really good with this organization. I expect Josh Bilicki throughout this year to outperform him. And again, my question is, are we going to see people like Alex Bay in that car? Are we going to see others like potentially Nick Lights behind the wheel? Could we see others get a chance and opportunity? Who knows at this point? But when you look at Garrett Smithley, again, this move doesn't surprise or shock me. I think he's got some investors that are helping with this team as well, and the investors with that team, I think, do like Garrett Smithley too. And Garrett does bring sponsorship and funding to the table, which is a pretty big reason why he's over at that organization for 2026. So we'll see how his performance is, but again, I don't expect much. I think it's going to be a pretty big struggle for Garrett Smithley in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Connor Zilisch and a test going on at North Wilkesboro Speedway. As many of you probably saw on social media, from Connor Zilisch's Instagram story, and of course, from the post that was put out by Trackhouse Racing on the main Twitter page as well, it looks like Connor Zilisch is testing at North Wilkesboro. But according to what I've heard, he's not the only one that is testing at North Wilkesboro earlier today. Remember, there was a lot of talk during when the trial was going on that there was expected to be an organizational test that was taking place at North Wilkesboro Speedway. Now, with a lot of people and media members being in the courtroom during this, I don't know if there was media was allowed to go to this test. And obviously, this was the first time we got to see Connor Zilisch in a full-time ride at Trackhouse Racing. Of course, we've seen Connor Zilisch make a few select starts in the NASCAR Cup Series of Trackhouse Racing, but this was the first time we saw him behind the wheel of a number 88 machine. And it's also going to be the first time if Daniel Suarez is down there. It'll be the first time we've seen him in the 7. I wonder if it's just one car from each manufacturer, whether it's Chevy, Ford, and Toyota, maybe like they brought for Ford, someone like a Brad Keselowski or something like that. I'm not sure. But I think that this is a big deal for Connor, because obviously there's going to be a lot of expectations going into 2026. And then, of course, they were testing the higher horsepower package at North Wilkesboro. Reminder, tracks that are under 1.5 miles, so basically 1.3 miles or shorter, basically do have the short track package. So the few new tracks are going to get the higher horsepower 750. That, of course, being tracks like Gateway and other tracks like Darlington and Bristol and Dover, and a few other tracks got the treatment as well. I think Nashville also got that same treatment as well. And of course, I think the spoiler is different. I think some of the things on the underbody have changed with the car as well for the higher horsepower races. I do find that to be very interesting on the car. So maybe the racing can hopefully be a little bit better, because we have seen issues in next-gen car. Trust me, NASCAR has offended this car quite a bit, and we're going to talk about that when we do get to discussing a lot of the trial coverage. But to me, I certainly think that there are some things I'm not the biggest fan of with this car. I just hope that with the changes they made, the racing product can be better. My expectations, though, are not extremely high at this point, and I'm not certainly confident about the racing product going into this year. We'll see how things go on that front. But again, it's obviously a big deal that they're going to be testing this car, and I think it's huge they got the opportunity to test in North Wilkesboro. Again, hopefully the racing product can be better in the NASCAR Cup Series, and we can overall get better racing in the 2026 year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Isabella Robusto. As it was officially announced earlier today that Isabella Robusto will be joining Nitro Motorsports in the ARCA Menard Series in 2026. Now, her number was not officially announced, just like the other drivers in the team and organization, but the understanding is most likely a lot of the numbers that Venturini Motorsports use in 2025 are going to be transitioning over to the Nitro Motorsports team in 2026, because remember, Venturini Motorsports owner Billy Venturini is actually going to be working at Nitro Motorsports at least for the next couple of years as a higher-up manager of the organization. This has been a rumored move that's been expected to happen over the course of the last couple of months. A lot of people from the Venturini Motorsports team were more likely to be moving over to Nitro Motorsports in 2026. For Isabella Robusto, this is another really solid opportunity for her. She had some really good runs in the ARCA Menard Series in 2025. She had a couple really strong performances. I go back back to the Talladega race where she was in position to pick up the win in that event. I think she finished second or third in that race. Then I think about some other races where she qualified really well, and she did make some mistakes, but she also was a rookie in the series on a full-time stint. But I think there was a lot of promise from her throughout the year, and she had a lot of top fives and even a lot of top 3 and top 4 speed throughout the year. Obviously, Venturi Motorsports is not the same team they were a few years ago when they were winning a lot of races and contending with championships. Guys like Jesse Love and Corey Heim, when they were behind the wheel, this is a team that did take a step back. I mean, unless you're in the 18 or the 28 car, which is the Joe Gibbs Racing or Pinnacle Racing Group, it's going to be really difficult to win. We saw a lot of races this year where Brendan Queen and, of course, Max Rees and William Swalch and those guys and Brent Cruz, too, picked up victories in that car. That's why it was so easy for Brendan Queen to win the championship this year. So expectations for her, she's going to be joining the same team that also got 2 wins. We saw Trey Lasovich in his first start win a race in the ARCA Series, and we also saw Thomas Annunziata win at Lime Rock Park in the number 70. As for the remainder of Nitro Motorsports, we know Gavin Michelle is going to be driving in some races with that team. We also do know, of course, that Leland Honeyman is going to be full-time in the number 20, and then it's rumored that Thomas Annunziata is also expected to go over to that organization in 2026. We're just going to have to wait and see who else, in fact, ends up over there for next year, but I think it's great to see that she got the opportunity. I hope she can have a ton of success and run really well with the Nitro Motorsports team. I hope she can do very well and have a really strong time over there at Nitro Motorsports in the ARCA Menard Series in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Patrick Staropoli. Now, there's been a lot of rampant rumors and speculation around the number 48 Big Machine racing car for 2026. When I initially look at the post the NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia account put out a couple days ago, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be basically about Eric Almirola, considering that Eric Almirola was sitting next to Nick Sanchez. But if you actually look at the header in the song that was chosen, it actually has association with a doctor. And you're thinking to yourself, who would be a doctor that is a driver? Look no further than Patrick Staropoli. There has been a lot of rumors over the last couple of days that Patrick Staropoli, it sounds like, might be the individual that is replacing Nick Sanchez in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2026. It is worth noting that Patrick Staropoli does bring a lot of funding and a lot of sponsorship to the table with his own companies, I'm pretty sure. And he also does own a company that does surgeries, I'm pretty sure. And he has had a career on that side of things. Patrick also at one point was a development driver for Michael Waltrip Racing. He did actually win an ARCA West race, the number 99 car, in 2014. And in 2025, in the few ARCA races that he ran, he actually looked really competent at times and did an alright job behind the wheel. But I'm going to be real and honest. As much as it is a potential really cool opportunity for Patrick Staropoli to get this chance and opportunity, I don't want it to be at the expense of Nick Sanchez. We're going to talk about Nick here in just a short little bit, but Nick Sanchez, in my opinion, absolutely deserved to be back in this 48 car. And granted, there might be some stuff that's happening to Nick Sanchez for next year, but Nick Sanchez made the playoffs with this car in 2025, got the team's first win without a Cup Series driver at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and actually had a really realistic shot of getting to the round of 8 and did have almost very similar numbers as a rookie to Parker Kligerman, who put together a really solid year in 2025. So as much as I think, again, it's a good opportunity for Patrick, if he does, in fact, end up over there, he would not be my first choice. I think it would have been more interesting if he had a guy like, let's say, Corey Heim get behind the wheel, but the problem is Corey Heim doesn't bring sponsorship and funding to the table. And then, of course, you have another guy like Matt DiBenedetto, but Matt DiBenedetto doesn't bring sponsorship and funding. Now, I certainly think Patrick Staropoli is better than Connor Mosack. I thought initially Connor Mosack was going to be the driver behind the wheel, considering there's been rumors he won't be, which we know at this point he won't be back at McAnally Hillman. We're going to talk about that story here in just a short little bit. But I think that Patrick going there is interesting. I don't think Patrick's going to put up the same numbers realistically as we've seen from Nick Sanchez. I think Sanchez did a really good job with this team and program and put together some really good numbers. It's a shame to see that Nick's not back with the program next year. It'll certainly be interesting if Patrick is in fact behind the wheel. Not sure if that's going to happen. We'll have to wait and see how that kind of goes. But again, it sounds like that might be what the possibilities at this point. And I think it would be a little bit of a downgrade if he was a driver for the program in 2026, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nick Sanchez. Now, We talked about Nick Sanchez here a little bit ago when we were talking about the potential of Patrick Staropoli getting behind the wheel of the number 48 car in 2026. But Nick Sanchez earlier today did in fact go on Sirius XM NASCAR radio to talk a little bit about the departure that ended up happening. Nick Sanchez did find out, apparently according to what was put out in a statement, as he stated, he found out over the weekend on Saturday that he would not be returning to Big Machine Racing in 2026. He did say while he is definitely disappointed to get the news he wouldn't be returning, he understands it is just business and said while it's a bad time to announce that we were going to be moving on for not returning to the team, he understands it is just strictly business and is not really upset about it. He also says he is working on things for 2026. He did confirm to people on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio that he's already had discussions for the 2026 NASCAR season and is looking to potentially have different opportunities with different organizations throughout the 2026 year. It is really unfortunate that we see this a lot nowadays where sponsorship and funding matters a lot more. And granted, Nick Sanchez, from what I understand, he is bringing a lot of money to organizations. I mean, he brought Gainbridge onto Big Machine Racing. There were rumors in 2025 that Big Machine Racing was going to run a second car in select races. So to see this news here for him is really frustrating. But I do have a little bit of theory around Nick Sanchez. My theory is that maybe he won't be leaving the O'Reilly Auto Parts after all, or maybe going down to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. Spire Motorsports, he has been associated with. He drove in the 2 truck for Rev Racing, but Rev Racing got a lot of their in-house stuff from Spire. A lot of people from the 2 truck went over to work with Raja Karuf in 2025. Kevin Bonham Manning, who was a crew chief for Sanchez, went to work with Raja. My theory is that Nick Sanchez is going to be in the Spire Motorsports camp in some way, shape, or form in 2026. Whether that is in the number 71 truck, maybe replacing Raja Karuf, or maybe going into the 77 Spire car, because there's been rumors over the last couple months that Spire Motorsports may form an O'Reilly Auto Parts program, though nothing's been officially announced on that front. I think it makes a lot of sense at this point for Nick Sanchez to go to a Spire O'Reilly Auto Parts program. If they do get the funding and resources to do that, considering Spire Motorsports does have a ton of funding at this point, that would make the most sense at the moment right now. I just feel like for Nick Sanchez, though, it's really unfortunate to find out this late in the game, and I do think that Big Machine Racing did make a really dirty move this late into the silly season. I mean, we're only about 2 months away from the season starting. In fact, we're less than 2 months away from the clash happening, as a matter of fact, though the lawsuit might change things at this point. But I do think that when it comes to something like this, it's definitely disappointing to find out that you're losing your seat. But I think Nick Sanchez understands how the business works, so I hope he's able to find a new ride for next year, hoping to get sponsorship to go racing. He's kind of in a similar situation to where Corey Heim is currently at the moment, where Corey Heim also doesn't know what he's doing right now for 2026. Hope he's able to find a ride also for next year, but Nick's still looking for a seat. We'll hopefully find out what Nick's doing here in the future, and hopefully he can find a ride to race in the series in 2026 in NASCAR's top divisions. And now we're going to head to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chris Wright. Now, we talked about the story on the channel yesterday, but it's officially announced and confirmed yesterday that Chris Wright will be joining McAnally-Hilgeman Racing full-time in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026, driving a number 81 truck. F&B Corporation, which has been associated with his family for many, many years, will be the sponsor on that truck for every single race next year. And Darren Fraley, who was a crew chief for him in the 2 select race that he ran in the number 16 truck for the McAnally team in 2025, he'll be the crew chief for Chris in 2026. Like I explained in my video yesterday, I am definitely really disappointed to see this because for me, when I look at Chris Wright, I think that this team, and I understand why they made the move. Sponsorship and funding is the name of the game. And if you bring sponsorship and funding to the table, you're going to get these chances and get opportunities to join teams and organizations. But at the same time, I really wish funding and sponsorship wasn't a main factor to things. I mean, look what he did at Our Motorsports this year. He got 1 top 10 at Our Motorsports in 2025. And keep in mind, I want to remind everybody, the reason he got a top 10 in this race is not because, he straight up ran up front the whole entire event. He spun out at one point in the race, I'm pretty sure, and because of how chaotic the race was, and because being considered one of the worst races in NASCAR history, he got a top 10 out of it, all things considered. That race was not indicative of how talented a race car driver is. On top of that as well, we all remember the beef he had with Josh Wiggy early in the year, and we all remember it spilled over to Twitter, where Chris Wright did not take accountability and responsibility for what happened on the racetrack. He continued to try to blame Josh Wiggy, I think, for every single incident that happened on the racetrack, and it completely backfired in the butt for him, considering he basically did not look really good from a lot of stuff that happened there. And then, of course, he's been fired halfway through the year. Now, our motorsports closing, that's not all on Chris Wright. They brought him in the team in the first place because they were having funding issues. But the prior year in 2024, Anthony Alfredo got that team in a borderline position to make the playoffs and nearly made it, finishing in the top 20 in points. Meanwhile, Chris Wright was last in the standings and did worse than Haley Deegan, and she did not look good, don't get me wrong, in racing. But good Lord, Chris Wright was much worse than she was. At least she got a couple top 20s throughout the year. As for expectations, he's going to get outperformed by his teammates. I think his teammates going next year are going to do much better than him in 2026. I don't think Chris Wright's going to do much. I think the performance isn't going to be there. I think it's going to be a bad year for him in general, and I think his performance isn't going to be there. And I think Chris Wright doesn't perform well and has statistically a really bad year and struggles, and I think he's going to finish outside the top 20 points, and I wouldn't be surprised or shocked if he doesn't finish the year in the Truck Series with that team in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story in today's episode, as we're talking about Daniel Hemric. As it was officially announced earlier today that Daniel Hemric will be returning to McAnally-Hilgeman Racing in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026, driving a number 19 truck once again. It was also announced today as well that Napa has signed a multi-year extension with the McAnally-Hilgeman Racing team, and they will continue sponsoring after still being with the team for 36 years up to this point. Now, unlike the Chris Wright move we talked about, this move also is not shocking and surprising. And unlike Chris Wright, I'm actually really excited about this announcement for Daniel Hemric. 2025 was a year at times for struggles for Daniel Hemric. He wasn't up to the same level this year as guys like Corey Heim and Lane Riggs and Chandler Smith were in the 2025 season, but I do think Daniel Hemric actually did have a pretty solid year with this team. He did get a win with the organization at Martinsville Speedway, and he ran up front in a lot of races throughout the year, and he did put together a pretty consistent season to the point where he made the round of 8 and was very, very close to making the championship 4 in 2025. And I think he got an opportunity to do a backflip, which is only the second time he's done it in NASCAR's top divisions. The other time is when he won the championship in the O'Reilly Series in 2021. When you think about Daniel Hemric's career at this point, I think it is certainly interesting. There were rumors at one point, of course, that he could be joining Kaulig Racing in the Truck Series in 2026, considering the fact he did make some starts in the O'Reilly Series in 2025 for Kaulig. But then, if you got an opportunity to go back to a team that's had success and you've worked together very well, especially with your crew chief Kevin Bellacore, and you have a lot of success, I'm going to stick with the team that I've had a ton of success with. Plus, I got two teammates that are going to be really good with him. The lineup for McAnally-Hilgeman Racing outside of Chris Wright, I think they do have a pretty good lineup going into next year. They obviously do have Tyler Ankrum returning to the program next season, who put together a really solid year, picked up his first win since 2019 at Kentucky, and had his best statistical season of his truck career. And then, of course, you will have Christian Eckes, who will be back in the 91 truck in 2026, replacing Jack Wood. I think that this was a really good move to bring Christian back down. Obviously, Christian, we didn't know until recently what he was doing, and then he got the opportunity to work in the 91 truck, and Dave Ellens is going to be the crew chief on that truck. I think that he is going to be a championship contender, and I think the other two are going to be championship contenders as well. So what happens with Daniel Hemric in 2026? What are my expectations? I do think Daniel Hemric is going to be a factor and contender for the championship. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't just get one win in 2026, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has his first ever multi-win season. I think Daniel Hemric is certainly that capable of doing that going into the next year, and I think he's going to be able to do that. I think the performance from this team, there's so much potential with this program. I think it's going to be a phenomenal year for him, and I think he will be in that conversation. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of really strong competition next year. You're going to have Brendan Queen, and, of course, you're going to have Justin Haley, who both will be with Kaulig, and you have Daniel Dye also. And throughout the year, you're going to have other drivers. Whoever won the Gong Show, and then, of course, guys like Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, potentially Cletus McFarlane as well. You're going to have the front row drivers of Chandler Smith and Lane Riggs. You're going to have Ty Majeski. You're going to have Ben Rhodes. You're going to also have other drivers in the field. You're going to have Gia Ruggiero. You're going to, of course, have Caden Honeycutt, who'll be back and who'll be racing with Tricon in 2026. You got a lot of really strong competition going into next year. But at the end of the day, I'm excited for Hemric. It's a great opportunity, and I think it's amazing to see that Daniel Hemric will be returning to McAnally Hogan Racing next year. I think he's going to be a factor. I think he's going to be a strong contender, and I think he'll put together a really good season with the McAnally Hogan Racing team. I think multiple wins will come from him in 2026, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story in today's episode as we're talking about updates in the 25M Racing and Front Row Motorsports trial. So obviously what's been going on for the last couple weeks has been the trial between NASCAR and 25M Racing and Front Row Motorsports. And there's been a lot of really interesting information that has been revealed over the course of the last couple days and some interesting tidbits that I've noticed throughout the trial. So over the last couple days, the 25M Front Row Motorsports camp did officially finish up their side of the trial. They brought Steve Phelps up to the stand, then they had Richard Childress go up to the stand, and then they had an economist that they finish up an accountant as well. And then Jim France went from yesterday and went into today. And then, of course, we began hearing the testimonies from NASCAR side, and John Prost did go up to the stand as well. Let's begin by talking about Steve Phelps. Now, Steve Phelps was certainly very interesting. He, of course, did defend the next-gen car quite a bit throughout his testimony, where he basically said that the next-gen car was the safest car that NASCAR has ever made, which I have to completely disagree with, considering the fact that it actually ended a driver's racing career, that being Kurt Busch, and Cody Ware had a leg injury at Texas Motor Speedway, and a very small hit by Alex Bowman caused Alex Bowman to pretty much miss the remainder of the 2022 season. And people will then come and say, well, they've made that car a lot safer, and while yes, the car may be safer now, they shouldn't have even been an issue in the first place. I mean, I would probably rather crash in a car tomorrow at this point than crash in the current car, because we had Tyler Reddick who also was having concussion-like symptoms. So I completely disagree with what he was saying there about the next-gen car. And as far as the product, I think that's it's not really objective. I think that's subjective. Objectively, I think the racing with the next-gen car has not been made much better. Now, granted, I think the short tracks and road courses have improved, but the intermediates have been the only thing that's been consistently really, really good. And when you look at the racing product with the next-gen car, the only reason it's been great is because Goodyear's had to step up to the plate and carry this car. If it wasn't for Goodyear having to fund as much money as they've had to try to make this car better, I think the racing then would have been much worse. So I completely disagree that the racing product hasn't been better, especially super speedways. Good Lord, the racing in super speedways has not been really good. One other thing he did reveal throughout it is that there continues to be talk about Auto Club returning, and he says we're still looking to try to get the Auto Club short track done. They still have 90 acres of land they could use. At this point, I'm very pessimistic about Auto Club returning. Trust me, I would love to see Auto Club Speedway return, but it's been nearly 4 or 5 years. It's been 2 years since they last ran there, and they haven't even made any progress on trying to get the track done. The earliest racing, in my opinion, it could probably happen is like 2027 at the earliest, and I think that's basically generous. I think the earliest we'll get racing there is near the end of the 2020s, and at that point, someone will probably try to buy up the rest of that property, and NASCAR probably sell off the land, especially if they end up losing the trial at this point. Then Richard Childress, he took the stand. And Richard Childress will talk about some of the comments he made about a new team here in just a little bit. There wasn't a lot of really essentially groundbreaking information outside of the fact that Richard Childress did seem to get a little bit agitated on the stand, justifiably so, for we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But he did reveal that he only makes a lot of products, and basically he only gets it a positive product when basically from his companies, his engine company that he uses for ECR engines, and a manufacturing company for the military as well. He does not make a profit off of racing in the Cup Series. He hasn't really made a profit in a very, very long time. He also doesn't, in fact, own 100% of the ownership stake in the team. He only owns 60% of the ownership stake of Richard Childress Racing. 40% of that goes to Chartwell, an investment company that started investing in about 2003, but apparently they've been looking to maybe sell their stake of Richard Childress Racing as well. And then, of course, we talk about the dispute, which apparently they're going to be kind of talking about that dispute going into tomorrow. And they kind of want to figure out what source kind of told them about some of the information that was an NDA, which is a non-disclosed agreement, which seems like NASCAR violated certain things. And we're probably going to find out who kind of leaked that information in the not-so-distant future. Then we get to stuff that happened, of course, with Jim France. And Jim France really did not have a lot to say from what people said on Tuesday. It was a lot of, I don't know, I don't recall. He did reveal that he is, of course, not a big fan of permanent charters and kind of explained that when NASCAR did their examination with them, basically saying he doesn't know where the landscape is going to be when it comes to the media deal. And Jim Franson got asked by Jeffrey Kessler when he cross-examined again, what do you mean by no permanent charters? And he said he didn't recall in that situation with some of the text that surfaced as well. Then we get to John Probst. This is the first person from NASCAR side for their side of the case. He did reveal some information that it cost $14 million for them to develop the next-gen car, which to me, that seems very, very low, all things considered. That's not as much money as I thought it was going to be, but $14 million seems a little bit low considering the teams have spent a lot more money than that at this point. He also said that 2311 is the third biggest spender for the thing, which Denny Hamlin did comment on Twitter that because they expanded from a 2-car team to a 3-car team, they pretty much said I think that's a big reason why they kind of had to spend as much money as they did, which I think that makes a lot of sense. Then John Probst did continue on by talking about that tunnel that Chip Ganassi owned, because he actually used to work in Chip Ganassi Racing before working with NASCAR. And then, of course, he talked about a new potential OEM as well, where basically they continue here talks about new OEMs. A lot of that does associate with Dodge, more than likely. Obviously, Dodge hasn't rumored to be coming in at this point. And we know Dodge could be in the Cup Series by 2027. Bob notes that's likely manufacturer. Honda's been also rumored as well. They could be coming in 2027 or 2028. I think that's certainly possible. In general, there was some interesting stuff that came out from the trial. Other people did a much more in-depth talk. I suggest going and checking out the teardown, and other people like ARCA East, who was in the courtroom earlier tonight. I think there's some interesting stuff, and we should be finishing the trial in the next couple days. The final day of the trial for all the main stuff. Then you got closing arguments on Monday, and I think we'll get a decision either Tuesday or Wednesday. I think that's going to be some really important days on the trial. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Johnny Morris. Now, last night I did a video talk about the story on the channel, but I do want to go a little more in depth on it. As Johnny Morris last night wrote a scathing letter to NASCAR and was not very happy with NASCAR and defended Richard Childress as well. A little bit of context, a couple weeks back, some text surfaced where NASCAR's commissioner, Steve Phelps, went out and called out Richard Childress. He called Richard Childress a stupid redneck, basically needs to be taken out back and flogged, and called him an idiot multiple times. And Johnny Morris has a big association with NASCAR and has been associated with NASCAR people like Richard Childress for nearly 30 years at this point. So Johnny Morris wrote a scathing letter, and I'm going to read it. Statement by Johnny Morris, noted conservationist and founder of Bass Pro Shops on NASCAR and his friend Richard Childress. I've been a NASCAR fan since I was 7 years old when I started going to races at Fairgrounds Speedway in my hometown Springfield, Missouri with my grandpa Will, who was a lineman for the Frisco Railroad. We watched Willie Crane, Mark Martin, Ken Schrader, the Wallace brothers, and others try to beat our local hero Larry Phillips. In the years that followed, our company Bass Pro Shops has become a proud sponsor of NASCAR, a sport that resonates deeply not only with our own outfitters, but with our core customer base, America's 180 million outdoor enthusiasts and 60 million hunters and anglers. I speak up today on behalf of the wonderful people in our company who consider it an honor and a great source of pride to have sponsored NASCAR and our friend Richard Childress and his grandson Austin Dillon for a very long time. Since Dale Sr. and Richard Childress welcomed us to the sport 28 years ago, Richard has become a special friend in life. He's a great leader, a fierce competitor, and a passionate advocate for outdoor enthusiasts and conservationists. He is a true American patriot, most of all to us. Richard is a longtime admired and respected member of our Bass Pro Shops family, and as I write this today, way too many of my fellow teammates, our valued customers, our independent dealers, and respected members of the conservation and military communities are outraged by how Richard and his family have treated NASCAR by some senior NASCAR leaders. We are extremely upset by the recent disclosure of shockingly offensive and false criticism of Richard by the commissioner of NASCAR, Steve Phelps. For the commissioner and his allies to attack one of the pillars of the sport is incredibly irresponsible and a disservice to everyone involved in NASCAR and its partners, sponsors, and fans. What Mr. Phelps may or may not be aware of is the fact that in attacking Richard Childress, the racing legend, he's also attacking one of the most respected leaders in NASCAR America's conservation community. The commissioner has repeatedly labeled Richard as an idiot, a dinosaur, a stupid redneck, and a clown. The fact is, Richard Childress has done as much to build and promote NASCAR as anyone in the history of the sport. The commissioner, in all his brand, has only managed to bring discredit to himself and the sport. Many of our teammates have validly expressed concern that the commissioner's recently revealed contempt for Richard Childress makes it abundantly clear that he and his lieutenants are not capable of being fair and objective when it comes to impartially enforcing the rules and regulations that govern the sport, including the objective assessment of fines and penalties, going back to the Austin Hill suspension and, of course, the Austin Dillon penalty at Richmond. And this is a threat to the very integrity of the sport. We can't help but wonder what would happen if Major League Baseball brought in a new commissioner and he or she trash talk one of the true legends who built the game like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, or Babe Ruth. Such blatant disrespect would probably not sit well with the fans. Such a commissioner most likely wouldn't or shouldn't keep his or her job for very long. We write this letter with genuine respect for their families who give birth to the great all-American sporting tradition of NASCAR. The fans' families always celebrate the beginning of every race with faith and prayer and saluted patriotism with the singing of the national anthem, and remaining steadfast and going above beyond our veterans and active duty military. They have built the sport celebrated by hard-working American families. It is painful for all fans to watch the current conflict and division occurring within the sport we love. We hope the France family and team owners will reflect carefully on the damage that's being done to NASCAR in the ongoing dispute and dig deep and strive hard for compromise. We're cheering for a prompt and fair resolution that creates a positive path to a happy and long-term future for the founding family, team owners, and importantly, our fans. One thing is for certain, as the leaders in NASCAR seek to grow the sport and attract new generations of fans, they must never turn their back on or abandon the true pioneers and especially fans whom from the foundation of the sport we love. Respectfully submitted and originally handwritten in the deep woods, Johnny Morris, NASCAR fan, proud Richard Childress fan, and friend. I think that Johnny Morris said a lot of things that are very, very true. I think what NASCAR did in those texts was really unacceptable and unforgivable, and regardless of who wins the trial at this point, there is going to have to be leadership change in NASCAR. I don't think there's any denying that at this point. I think that talking and calling out both sides also in this case, and also we know at this point that Richard is considering legal action against NASCAR at this point, which I wouldn't be surprised or shocked with multiple ways that they might seek legal action. I appreciate him defending Richard Childress in this case. As much as I've criticized Richard Childress, I think it's unacceptable how they handle the situation. I think it's very scathing, but I think it's a very fair response from Johnny Morris. I think he did a really good job on his response, and I think it's a response that NASCAR needs to hear at this particular point, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress once again. Now, we kind of talked about the story on the channel yesterday and kind of talked a little bit about it. We were talking a little bit about the lawsuit. But Richard Childress was basically on the witness stand basically over the last day or so and was on the witness stand for about 45 minutes to an hour. And there's one little bit of information that was revealed when Richard Childress was on the stand. Now, like we mentioned earlier, it was reported that Richard Childress does not own Richard Childress Racing completely outright. He only owns 60% of RCR. We know that 40% is owned by Chartwell, a company, an investment firm that spent a lot of money on Richard. Apparently, they have also been looking to sell their stake in the company, which Richard was a little surprised that they kind of knew that was going on. But apparently, someone has been actually looking to buy Richard Childress' stake in the company. According to a report by Adam Stern and other reporters, Richard Childress was reportedly looking to sell his stake in a team to another person. That individual was Bobby Hillin Jr. And now is something that came interesting. The problem is that information was not supposed to be disclosed because apparently Bobby Hillin Jr. and other people signed an NDA. And they asked about it, where Richard Childress basically said the reason that they did not do that deal is because it was like a pie in the sky thing. It didn't feel like the deal was really going to go far, and it didn't feel like there was really anything good about the deal at this point on that front. It is absolutely crazy to me to think that Richard Childress was considering. There was something I think was put up on Reddit, I'm pretty sure, not too long ago, that Richard Childress was in fact considering doing something like this for the not-so-distant future, selling it to somebody, but we're not entirely sure who was looking to sell. Let's just say, hypothetically, Richard Childress did in fact end up selling his stake of the company to Bobby Hillin Jr. Would the organization still be called Richard Childress Racing? It probably would be at this point, considering Richard Childress would probably still own part of it, because he wasn't going to sell off, I think, everything in the company. I think he was looking to sell off maybe a part of it to Bobby Hillin Jr., but Bobby Hillin Jr. has not been in NASCAR for, I think, nearly 20 years. I think he made his last NASCAR start at Phoenix in like 2008 or 2009 for like the 81 car. I'm pretty sure it was like Eddie McDonald Racing back in 2009. And of course did win a race at Talladega in 1986, which of course at the time was one of the youngest winners in NASCAR Cup history at the time when he won at Talladega. And then of course Bobby Hillin Jr. did race for many years after that and did what looked like was trying to come back into sport. The other reason why the deal probably didn't happen, of course, at the time was basically something going on with the charters, and of course with the lawsuit going on at this point, I do think that played a pretty big factor on why Bobby Hillin did not make an official move to basically go and buy the team completely outright at that point and at that situation. But the other thing I kind of think about as well is, let's just say that this would have happened. What would this mean for a guy like Austin Dillon? Because we've heard over the years that Austin Dillon, there's been talk that Austin Dillon eventually wants to buy an ownership stake or basically work at Richard Childress Racing, and many think that in the future Austin Dillon can move to more of an executive role. Because I don't know if Austin Dillon has much long of a racing career at this point. I think Austin Dillon would fit more of the executive role at this point. I mean, Richard Childress is 80 years old and will be 81 at the end of 2026. And we all know that Austin is kind of setting himself up for that future to where he can eventually become an executive at Richard Childress Racing. We've heard those rumors over the years, and I find that to be very interesting. The big thing you got to look at as well, though, is the fact that this got put out. I wonder if Richard Childress is going to potentially end up suing, because we know that both sides on the legal side are not very happy about this. Not only is Richard Childress not very happy about this information being revealed, but we also know that the team side of things, Jeffrey Kessler and the other lawyers on the team, are looking to figure out the disputes on this, and basically whoever sent that information may be getting in a lot of trouble at this point. And I think that this is certainly something, because this is one that because a lot of NASCAR information, I think you've noted this over the years, it does get leaked very, very easily, and that's why stuff like this ends up coming out. That's why you hear a lot of things and you find it interesting. That's why 2011 was very quick to sign Tyler Reddick as quick as they did before information came out, because I think everyone knew more than likely Reddick was going to end up over 2011 for 2024. That got moved up a year early when Kurt Busch announced retirement from full-time racing, and then of course we saw then Reddick had his year contract basically bought out when Busch was announced for the A car. I think it is certainly interesting for sure that something like this did in fact end up happening. And I think, because obviously, like I mentioned with the Johnny Morris story, we do know for a fact that there is a lot of legal action that is being considered at this point against NASCAR. And I wonder if Richard Childress may not be the only one considering legal action. And you think about the Johnny Morris side of things to top it on as well. What happens if, let's say, like Bass Pro Shops, in fact, ends up leaving? Because there is a possibility that Bass Pro could leave out over all of this, which I think is concerning. But not only that, but Richard getting involved in a legal situation for NASCAR for two reasons. Obviously, the defamation side of things, because Richard probably feels like at this point that they're kind of being misread at this point and not treated the same, which we've heard the blue-collar team comments, which he actually mentioned that during his testimony, by the way, where he is a blue-collar team. From people that were in the courtroom, he did say that. I just think it's so interesting at this point that something like that, though, that he could have sold this team and organization. It would have been one of the biggest stories if it ended up happening. I think eventually Richard is going to retire from running RCR in the future. I just think he wants to do it and probably give it to his grandson at this point, and Austin run it, which I think Austin would probably be a really good side on the ownership things. I mean, he owns a professional bull riding team. He also is a big fan of charters being permanent, and I think that if we get to the point of this lawsuit, I think charters becoming permanent would be the best thing for the sport. We'll see what happens as time progresses, goes on that front, but it's interesting that Richard was looking to sell. I think that's a big story that probably everyone should be talking about at this point, that something like that could have ended up happening. So, that's for today's Law NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get some more of that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts on the potential possibility that Richard Childress Racing could have sold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what do you think the future is for Bass Pro Shots with Johnny Morris's comments in NASCAR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any other major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow on the channel, we are going to have a video talk about 10 drivers who could probably join Project 91 in 2026. We've got some other videos that, of course, are planned for the weekend as well. On Sunday going to be doing my O'Reilly Auto Parts predictions for the series next year. And then on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video dropping. And then on Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe a silly season update as we get closer to Christmas. Who knows at this point will be coming out. We got content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shaman Gisberg, and Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bo Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Savard, Dodge Ram, Brad Keselowski, Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, Ryan Priest, Connor Zolch, Junior Motorsports, Red Bull, Daniel Suarez, you name it, all the good stuff what we talk about on the channel in the coming days and the coming weeks as well, along with Michael Jordan, the 2011 Front Row Trial. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.